Welcome to the Transforming Trauma Podcast, a complex trauma podcast through the NARM Training Institute. My name is Sarah Buino, and I'm so excited to be sharing today's interview with you. Hey, Transforming Trauma listeners. Please join us starting in June for our online NARM training in learning how to transform trauma. This online NARM basics training is available for professionals working with clients or populations dealing with complex trauma. Now more than ever before, it's essential that we learn how to resolve complex trauma and support post-traumatic growth. NARM provides a relational approach to addressing the current COVID pandemic and tools to support healing in the aftermath of this collective trauma. If you're looking for more advanced training in complex trauma and are working in mental health, healthcare, education, substance abuse recovery, or allied fields, join us for this Level 1 NARM training to become a NARM-informed professional. For more information and to apply, please visit at www.narmtraining.com/online-basics. Today's guest is Bethany Saltman. Bethany is an author, award-winning editor, and researcher. Her work can be seen in magazines like The New Yorker, New York Magazine, Atlantic Monthly, Parents, and many others. Strange Situation, A Mother's Journey into the Science of Attachment was published in April of 2020 by Random House. This is her first book. Bethany is also a longtime student of Zen, and she's devoted to the fine art and game-changing effects of paying attention. She lives in a small town in the Catskills with her family. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Bethany Saltman. Hello, Bethany. Welcome to Transforming Trauma. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, you got introduced to me via our friend Brad Kammer, and I was so excited to hear about your book. And we'll get into all that. But first, the first question that we always ask on this podcast is, what do you hope listeners will get out of the episode today?
I would hope that listeners would get some good reasons to stop shaming themselves.
That is pretty much the NARM philosophy. So I think this is going to be great.
Yeah, good.
Yeah. So please introduce yourself.
Well, my name is Bethany Saltman, and I am an author. I just came out with a book called Strange Situation, A Mother's Journey into the Science of Attachment, published by Random House April 21st during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's been quite a ride. I've been working on this book for 10 years.
Wow.
I've been saying that for a long time, so it's actually more than 10 years now.
Wow.
And I live in the Catskills of New York. I have a daughter who's 14 and a husband and two dogs. We just got a new puppy. And
I did too.
Really?
Yeah. Not a puppy, but all dogs are puppies to me.
Yeah. So it's a good time to be getting, more critters in the house. And I'm a longtime Zen student.
Yeah. And remind me your connection with, how did Brad know you?
Brad knows me through my therapist.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And he was saying that you're very aligned with the NARM philosophy. And I told you before we started the recording that I just listened to a podcast episode where you were interviewed about a lot of the stuff in the book. And I just kept hearing so much that was resonating with the NARM philosophy in there.
Well, that's great, because honestly, when I was invited to be on the show, I thought, well, I'm not a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a trauma specialist. I'm married to a trauma specialist. My husband is a somatic experiencing practitioner. I've interviewed Peter Levine for an article a long time ago. I mean, I know the basic perimeters of this work, but I am not a practitioner myself.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully this will be helpful for people.
Yeah, I think so. Because we talk in NARM a lot about attachment, and that's what your book is about. So
Yes.
What drew you to wanting to research attachment and write about it?
And I should also say that my therapist is a NARM. I do have a NARM therapist. So I know a little bit about it from being on the receiving end.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And one thing that she and I have discovered is that attachment sort of means potentially different things in different contexts. So the attachment that I studied is sometimes in some ways a little bit different than just the way that it's used in NARM. I can't really speak to that because I'm not totally sure how you guys talk about it, but I will tell you what I've learned and then we can get into it.
Yeah.
So I started studying attachment, when my daughter was born. She's 14 now. I loved her like crazy. I had all the markers of affection. I, thought she was adorable. I wanted to be around her. I didn't have any trouble, quote, bonding, as, people sometimes talk about. But I had imagined that my love for her would somehow eclipse the rest of me, and I would no longer be angry, edgy, anxious, irritable me. And I soon discovered that that was not, in fact, the case. And so I loved her dearly, and I was angry, resentful, irritable, and really unkind even sometimes. And realizing that scared me. And I thought, there must be something wrong with me, because maternal love is supposed to take over. You're never supposed to feel irritated with a baby. Like, what kind of a monster gets annoyed at a baby? And it was so dark. It was such a dark feeling. And I did have a short bout with postpartum depression, which was very instructive. It was short, but wow, that's some heavy duty stuff right there. But then that lifted, but I still felt this malaise of being myself. And that wasn't a new feeling. But coupled with this, love gave me a lot of anxiety. Like I just didn't understand how I could love someone and still, like, what kind of protection is love? Why bother loving if I can still be such a bitch to this vulnerable creature whom I love? So someone had asked me to write a column for a local magazine about being a Buddhist mother. And so I jumped at the chance because I thought, this is a good opportunity for me to get in here, and because now on top of it all, I was also a longtime Zen practitioner. So I was supposed to know better and have the tools to, not act out. So in my writing, I started the column when she was 6 months old, when my daughter was 6 months old. And every month I had this incredible opportunity to sit down and try to reckon with the contradictions that I felt about being a Zen practitioner and all of the fantasies and idealization that go along with that, the spiritual bypassing, and the reality of what I was coming up against. And I quickly figured out that I could interview, when authors have books coming out, they'll say yes to pretty much any interview. And so
good to know.
Yeah, no, it's actually really good to know. If you have any kind of a market and you pitch it, most people will say yes. So I started interviewing all these really great people and asking them basically, how do you live? How do you, do this human being thing? And as I was doing this, I started to come across the concept, the words attachment. And I started to see mention of the strange situation, the laboratory procedure. I started to see mention of this all the time, and then realized that I had thought that attachment was one thing, which is what I had learned from reading Dr. Sears and his attachment parenting. And then I started to see that there was this other thing about attachment that involved this thing called the strange situation. And I started to become very intrigued. And I realized that there was something more to it than what I had thought I knew from Dr. Sears and all of his checklist of behaviors that you need to follow in order to have an attached child, which now I know is utter rubbish, not true, harmful, shame-inducing. So that's one thing. And so the strange situation, I now know, it took me 10 years of trying to learn it, to understand it, not because it's complicated, but because of my own anxieties or attachment activation. Essentially, the strange situation is a laboratory procedure that Mary Ainsworth, who is a big part of my book, she developed in the 1960s after doing a lot of very intense qualitative longitudinal research in the homes between mothers and babies. So she would sit and watch, like Jane Goodall with chimps, mothers and babies, and watch what she called the critical situations of, she wasn't looking for behaviors. She wasn't looking for smiles or laughs or touches. She was looking at relational moments. And she first did this in Uganda, and then she did it in Baltimore with very small sample sizes, 26 dyads each in each location. And she started to notice the African babies and the American babies had a lot in common, most things in common. But one thing they didn't have in common was their propensity to use their mother as a secure base with her present. And she realized that part of that could have been because she was a very strange stranger in Africa, because most of these babies had never seen a white person. And so they were under stress. And so they used their parent effectively as a secure base. And whereas the largely white children in Baltimore were so familiar with someone like her, were so much more used to being left with a new person, that they didn't, perhaps this was her thinking, they didn't have as much stress, so they weren't exhibiting as much secure-based behavior. So she thought, let me take them into the lab and give them a teeny dose of stress and see if they use their mother as a secure base under those circumstances. So that's the thinking behind the strange situation. So what it is it's a 20-minute laboratory procedure between a baby and their caregiver. And it's a series of separations and reunions. It's used like an X-ray to look inside the attachment system to see how is this relationship functioning. Is it a securely attached relationship? Is it an avoidantly attached relationship? Or is it a resistantly attached relationship or ambivalent? And so, that 20-minute procedure has been tested tens of thousands of times around the world with pretty much every kind of baby and caregiver we can imagine in most countries. And it has really stood the test of time, not for everything. It's not a theory of everything, but it is an incredibly incisive and delightfully, compressed kind of look into this very complex and yet simple. It's an elegant formulation of how the attachment system works. And so I became completely obsessed with this laboratory procedure and the woman who created it. And I wanted to know, how would my daughter and I do in the strange situation?
Yeah. And there's so much in there that I want to pull out. And I think just thinking about when you found the strange situation and you started to research it, I noticed in you, even just explaining it, kind of a light that turned on with this like, oh, I found this thing.
Yeah.
Did that change the way that you related to yourself or related to your child just by finding that?
Oh, that's such a great question. That is the core, that is the whole point. And, that is what a secure base does. And Mary Ainsworth used the word delight as a technical term to describe what has to exist. Not all the time, not even most of the time, maybe 50% of the time, maybe less, but a child has to feel that they are being delighted in by their parent sometimes. And as adults, so that's what the secure base kind of does, that the child feels felt. How do we feel felt? We feel felt by an adult, a caregiver who feels themselves. And so this delight, if you can't delight in yourself, you can't delight in someone else. You cannot give what you do not have. And so the secure base concept is really lovely because, Mary Ainsworth, she had a rough go of it in relationships. She fell in love with someone who I don't think was that related to her. We don't know a lot about him, Len Ainsworth, but they ended up getting a divorce and she went into psychoanalysis. And it was in this experience of psychoanalysis that she started to feel her own secure base. The delight started to arise within her. And that's when she did her most productive work. She was in Baltimore. She really did this incredible work in the Baltimore study. And that's when she developed the strange situation. So it's a spiral. And when I discovered her, I discovered the power of discovery. And that's one of the things I love about her, this delight in just exactly who we are and the way she delighted in the women that she studied, the totally imperfect mothers that she studied. And she was harsh sometimes. She spent a lot of time with these people. I have an over 7,000 page document on my hard drive of her notes from these visits. And, she was professional and she's a scientist, but she was also very human. And she was of the time, so talked a lot about women's neurosis and women coldness and distant. And she was as influenced by the time, still influenced by kind of a Freudian take on things. But she was just so alive and pointing to that aliveness as delight. And that when the secure baby is in the strange situation and is able to feel their angst when the parent leaves and then is able to come back to themselves when the parent returns, that's them being alive. The avoidant baby can't do that by one. They don't have that, what's called attentional flexibility to be able to say, oh my God, this sucks. I'm so unhappy. I hate this. Oh, she's back. I'm good. They can't do that because they don't trust in their own experience. And the resistant baby is moving so fast with their comings and goings of their own feelings that they also can't delight in the experience of themselves. And that's also what we learn in Zen, that it's not about transcending the moment or, getting past the moment. It's about entering it 100%. And that can hurt a lot, but it's delightful in the end. And so, yes, you're 100% right that that's the heart of the matter.
Yeah. And what you were saying as you're describing these different attachment styles and the way that we essentially want the child to, I'm just repeating what you said now, we want the child to be able to feel the distress when mother leaves, feel the calm when mother comes back. That's in NARM exactly what we're hoping to support people to potentially realize for themselves, is that they have that within themselves.
Exactly.
Right. And you even said connect to your own aliveness. And that's literally exactly what our founder, Larry Heller, is wanting, for people to connect to that part in themselves. And as I heard you tell, Mary's own story, that's exactly what happened for her. And the product of connecting with herself was this research that's so revolutionary, and then helped you, I'm guessing, connect to yourself, then create this book, which is going to help countless people.
Exactly. And it helped me connect to my daughter.
Yeah.
I was connected to her, but I felt like I wasn't doing it right, and that's where the shame part comes in. Shame is the killer.
Yep.
Because shame makes us feel like we're doing it wrong. And from a human perspective, there is no such thing as doing it wrong. From a behavior point of view, I mean, sure, there's wrong stuff to do. We all know that. And so we do our best to behave in ways that are, appropriate and helpful and attuned. But until we can actually experience the full spectrum of our humanity and our feelings, we'll never be able to attune to someone else, because we'll be so busy mitigating our own internal drama that everyone else is just objects.
Right. That we're projecting on.
Exactly. I mean, I'm overstating it, but, from a patterns point of view, that is ultimately what happens.
And what I've found that I've been able to give name to as a receiver of NARM, because I also have a NARM therapist as I'm learning the process. And what I found for myself is that shame sort of arises out of the judgment of whatever I'm feeling. And not only am I judging what I'm feeling, but I'm judging the judging of what I'm feeling.
Totally.
And so it's this compounded not rightness,
exactly.
which is exactly, like you said, Zen. I don't know much about Zen, but I know a little bit about Buddhism. And Buddhism is, we are this shiny diamond that we just need to uncover and meet where we are, instead of trying to resist what is. And that keeps us stuck in samsara, right?
Totally. Yes. Yeah. And samsara is translated as bumpy ride. It's just that feeling that like something's off. Like the wagon wheel is just not, like my wagon just isn't right. Everybody, and I'm so guilty of this. I mean, this is such a huge part of my malaise, my everyday, separation from my own bliss state, if you will, is that I'm always convinced that everybody else has it together. And I'm stuck over here really not getting it and, whatever, all that whole thing. And so, yes, the idea that if we can, the other side of shame is radical acceptance, which doesn't mean that we don't hold ourselves accountable. And I think that's part of the shame thinking. Like, oh, I need to be held accountable. Otherwise, I'm going to spew my neurosis all over the place. And it's actually totally the opposite. If we accept where we are, then we can actually manage our neurosis, and we can be kinder, we can be more attuned, we can be better parents, and we can be better parents to ourselves.
And from a NARM perspective, I actually don't think we've talked a lot about this on the podcast before, so I'll explain it for listeners. Please. And you may have heard this from your own therapist, but we talk about child consciousness versus adult consciousness. And child consciousness essentially being the survival strategies that come up related to the developmental trauma that we've experienced. So shame is a developmental trauma response to a situation that was bad, right? A child cannot conceive of themselves as good in a bad situation. So shame was actually a way to depress oneself in order to stay connected to the parent. And so when we're coming from that child consciousness space, yeah, we're making decisions that are reactionary and not necessarily helping us move towards what we want in our adult selves. And the way that NARM essentially just opens up space for the adult consciousness to step in and say, hey, wait, we do have some agency here. We do have some choice. And I might be able to do things differently than I have patterned myself my whole life. Have you experienced that in your sessions?
I'm sure I have, but it's so kind of intrinsic. It's hard to know.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I think I definitely have. If I think about the trajectory of the work I've been doing, it's certainly about getting more connected to my adult consciousness, for sure. And, I spent a lot of time just naming the child consciousness too. That's something I find compelling. And so, yeah, no, I think that's definitely right.
Can I ask questions about your therapy?
Sure,
I think
absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, I think that'd be really interesting.
I don't know how articulate I can be about it because it's so just me being in it, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm just curious, how long have you been with a NARM therapist or practicing NARM with that therapist?
I am so bad at time. I'm going to say a couple years.
Did your therapist all of a sudden one day come in and be like, hey, I'm going to do this new thing with you? Or did you start with them after they were already
No,
a
I
NARM
started
therapist?
with a NARM therapist.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm guessing, along the research of your book, you did run into recognition of some of the developmental trauma that you may have had growing up. Are you able to speak to any of that?
Yeah, for sure. There's certainly developmental trauma. I grew up in a house where I did not feel loved. And it wasn't just a feeling. I had people in the house telling me, we don't like you. And it wasn't balanced by, we love you. It was really like a pretty straight up diet of, you pretty much suck. We aren't interested in you. We don't like you. We don't think you're, interesting. I was the youngest of 3 kids and have 2 older brothers. And so that was, my parents never spoke to me that way, but my brothers did. All the time. And there hasn't really been a lot of work on sibling trauma.
Right. Yeah.
So I find that very interesting. And so, my parents, I believe that their mistake was just in not protecting me. But at the same time, I also feel when I meet other people whose parents were super enmeshed, I would prefer any day of the week to have had my experience where I was left alone. I was certainly neglected to some degree and unprotected, but I was also given a lot of confidence that I could handle it. And in fact, I did handle it. I am handling it still to this day, in fact.
Yep. And that's a very agency-filled statement there.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, part of the work, my work in the attachment world and getting my adult attachment interview done and getting the results of that. And, I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but it changed everything about who I thought I was. To have a different view. Doing this work with attachment and developmental trauma, I don't use those words, but that's, to use your language, changed everything about who I thought I was. And that's really the story of the book. The science of attachment was my method of discovery, but it's about the power of being able to change our story. And we change our story by seeing our story, whether it's through NARM or Zen or studying attachment or whatever it is. We can't metabolize it or have mind sight around it until we are able to see it. And that's what a secure attachment helps us do. It doesn't mean we're always happy. It doesn't mean we feel good. We have great self-esteem. We don't make mistakes. But a secure attachment helps us have a value in relationships. A securely attached person values attachment. And we will fight for ourselves.
And one of the things I've noticed with NARM too is that with the survival styles, we can sometimes be two sides of the same coin where I'm being told I'm not good enough. I'm either not good enough or you're totally wrong. And so if you're like fighting, that's the behavior. Either you're blaming yourself or you're blaming others, right? So fighting with self or fighting with others. But when you let go of that fight, that's where the adult consciousness comes in and you're no longer
right
playing with that coin.
Exactly. Yes, yes, yes. I think that's a process.
Yes.
Enlightenment is we've relieved ourselves of the burden of believing we're separate. I am nowhere near that. Like, I am totally over here still fighting for my life. Now, have I, come a long way? Do I have mindsight into my doing that, which slows it down? Definitely. Have I let go of it? No.
Well, I think from a NARM perspective, it's just moments of that.
Yeah, 100%.
I hear that in everything you're saying, that you absolutely have, as you're saying, moments of mindsight. And that is, I think, the letting go.
I mean, that's the Zen practice. Also, it's like, you spend 30 minutes on the cushion. It's not like you're ever going to spend 30 minutes in a state of intimacy with your thoughts, but you can have moments. And as you learn to sit and you develop concentration and learn, how to be facile with your thinking, you can have more and more and more thoughts. And then before you know it, you're sitting down for 30 minutes and you're actually very much at ease. Mm-hmm. And then you get up and you're angry again. But, it cooks throughout the day. It continues to cook us. That kind of letting go, if we're really letting go and not just avoiding, which is a very big if.
Yeah, you said spiritual bypass earlier, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, Zen people are so avoidant. I can say that because I am one.
We want enlightenment, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, enlightenment, AKA, I don't want to feel.
Right. Which is a survival strategy.
Right. Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have never really felt like I didn't want to feel. I think that's what I would call the blessing of my secure attachment, such as it is. Mm-hmm. I always was interested. I was always curious about, why do I feel this way? What is going on? Why am I, why are all my friends going to college and I'm sitting here smoking pot? Why am I, doing all of these behaviors that I don't see other kids my age doing? Why am I taking so many risks? Why am I such a delinquent? Why am I getting such bad grades? Why? And I was kind of curious about myself in a way. And I think that really saved me because I wasn't completely in it. I had some distance. I was watching.
Mm-hmm. So you were born Buddhist, it sounds like.
Kinda.
Right?
Kinda. I mean, in a way, I really thank my mother for that because she has that kind of mindsight and a kind of interest. And, other people in my family also. My dad's side of the family is very curious about states of mind. Mm-hmm. Because lots of people can be curious about, the news or, how you're going to succeed or external kinds of things. But to be curious about the self is a real gift.
Mm-hmm. And that is one of the number one, I guess, tenets of a NARM therapist is to truly be curious about the experience of the client instead of making assumptions that we know about the experience of the client. And that's one thing that is truly very, very, a very different perspective. I mean, I think a lot of therapists generally probably recognize that, but NARM really hammers it into us like, you don't know. You don't know what the experience is like. You have to ask. We talk about it as having hypotheses. And what I have found in my practice of learning to be a NARM therapist is when I let go of the belief that I know, I'm sometimes really surprised by what the client says. Right. And that's giving them a lot more space to show up in the relationship rather than, as I've grown in this work, I've been a very codependent therapist and really wanting to give people something, like you're going to walk away and you're going to say I'm a great therapist and that's going to make me feel better about myself. And yet I am not necessarily always giving people the dignity of their own experience, their own awakenings, their own sufferings, all of it. And with NARM, sometimes my clients will get so mad that I won't tell them what to do anymore.
Yeah.
And this is a space for your agency to arise. And then the struggle for folks who can't necessarily step into that yet, that's then the work that we get to do, which has been a different experience for me.
Totally. Yeah. When I said that I thought sometimes my therapist is just saying that, I'm speaking to that thing that I know I don't know if guilty of is the right term, but something that comes up for me a lot, which is confidence. Like sometimes when she'll say, I'm not sure, but try this on. Is it sort of like this? She's always right. And I feel, and I'm often accused of, and correctly, of being kind of arrogant, because when I see something going on, I know what's going on. And you can't tell me I'm wrong because I feel it, I know it. And that's a difficult thing to work with. Now, have I been wrong? Sure, I can be wrong about like the details and, but there are some relational dynamics or experiences that I feel so clearly, and it's not like a knowing, it's a feeling knowing. And so that gets really tricky, when I'm trying to be curious about other people. And I'm trying to be curious about my own part in a dynamic or, this kind of knowing. And it's so un-Zen, like that is the opposite. In Zen, we're supposed to, just be always not knowing, and not knowing is most intimate.
Beginner's mind.
Exactly. And sometimes I feel like that's kind of the patriarchy telling me I shouldn't be listening to myself. And I don't know. It's a tricky one. It's a really tricky one for me. I come up against this a lot.
I can relate to that personally. And from my developmental trauma experience, I have found it so difficult to trust so readily in my knowing because I was gaslit as a child, right? Everything's okay. It's not okay. It's not okay. Ooh. And even yesterday with my therapist, just kind of going back and forth with trusting this thing that I knew to be true and okay. So again, I think that's part of the survival style, right? That's how you've achieved who and where you are now today, is really trusting in that for yourself.
Right. It makes it difficult sometimes to be with others.
Well, this kind of leads into a question I was thinking, and if this is a spoiler alert for the book, tell me and we don't have to talk about this, but how have you seen yourself change in relationship to your daughter, to your husband, to other people in your life based on all this research about attachment?
That's not really a spoiler because the answer is, it's basically given me the reassurance to just keep doing what I'm doing, setting aside this other thing we're talking about right now, this kind of, intense, I wouldn't even call it confidence, but just like a grasping with my, how I'm seeing things. But, my work has always been to be curious and to practice my mind and to try to, allow in for more awareness. And the attachment work that I've done, the 10 years of research and into the science of attachment and Mary Ainsworth's life and her incredible offering has been to really affirm that is, regardless of what kind of pattern of attachment we have come into based on our lives and our ancestors and who raised us, the work is always the same, which is to just keep growing in our awareness. So my relationships have improved in the sense that I have really come to relax more in the presence of what I already know. That's the only thing to do. Like that is it. So however you want to find that, however one wants to find that through therapy or practice or friendships or journaling or whatever the heck it is. But so that's incredible. I am convinced of that.
That is so related to both Buddhism and NARM, just being with what is.
Yep. What else could we possibly do?
Well, I have spent a lot of time fighting what is.
No, I know.
Let me tell you, that's painful.
No, believe me. Me too. Yeah. Me too. What I meant was just that, like, when you think about it from a sort of rational, like what else could possibly work?
Right. Well, two questions. One, Since you mentioned, I know Brad is very interested in this as well, research on sibling abuse. Is that something that you have thought about researching or?
No, I don't really want to do any more research for a while.
Yeah.
No, I'd like to write a novel, like a mystery novel.
Oh, that sounds lovely.
Yeah, the research thing is so intense and so hard. I don't think I want to do that anymore. But I would love to hear about some research.
Right. Okay.
So
if we find any,
send it
we'll let
along.
you know.
Yes, I have been looking for this for many, many years, and there is very, very little.
And, so, friends, if you're listening and you are a researcher, this is an area of study that it would pay off.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because I can't be the only person in the world whose primary developmental trauma, I think, is through how I was treated by my brothers.
Yeah. I think you're exactly right. You are not the only one.
But I'm not sure if that's exactly how, like, my therapist would frame my developmental trauma. It was probably a lot around my parents not stepping in or intervening.
Right. And then I suppose the final question is just very open-ended, but is there anything that we didn't talk about that you want to make sure listeners hear?
Well, one thing that I think is just something to put a little, question mark in people's minds is about the difference between attachment styles work and patterns of attachment work. So like the social psychology and the developmental psychology. Because I've talked to many therapists who don't even know that Mary Ainsworth was a developmental psychologist and that there's a huge body of literature that is, through the adult attachment interview that is not a questionnaire. So when people talk about wanting to know their attachment styles and they take the quiz or they do the questionnaire, I mean, there's something to that, but actually the research that I've done has shown that there isn't really an overlap between what we learn in the adult attachment interview, which is a very intensive, unconscious, consciousness raising kind of experience versus what you know about yourself. And so I would really encourage therapists to explore the work of Mary Ainsworth and Mary Main and the adult attachment interview. People like Howard and Miriam Steele, Alan Sroufe, people who are doing this work now, Dan Siegel, who are doing the work on the adult attachment interview for clinicians, because it's so deep. And the attachment styles work is fine, but it's very different. And it's more like a personality index than the deep, entrenched work of what is getting passed down generation to generation because we don't see it.
Right.
So it's by its very nature, sort of the opposite, because in the attachment styles work, it's what you see that you're writing down. Well, guess what? The thing that you can't see is what's driving the ship.
Exactly. Yeah, self-report, I've always thought is so flawed.
Yeah. I mean, it is what it is. I can't speak to it. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a researcher. But as someone who's spent a long time swimming in the seas of this incredibly deep, profound, beautiful science, I really would encourage people to get into it because there's so much that can be gleaned, and it's whole body and mind stuff. It's like, it's real. It's real. It can't be wrapped up. My husband and I did the adult attachment interview training, and it was so incredible. It affects me every minute of my life. It really affected the way I see, the way I listen, the way I read, the way I understand people and coherence. And it was a very, very powerful experience.
Mm-hmm. Me Googling right now to get that information. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. So would you say the title of your book again so everyone can make sure that they're putting that in their Amazon cart right now?
Sure. Yes, please. And then write a review.
Yes.
Strange Situation, a good title for these days, I'm thinking. So it's called Strange Situation, A Mother's Journey into the Science of Attachment.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you. What a great conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining us for today's episode. If you want to learn more, you can check out the show notes or visit us at www.narmtraining.com/transformingtrauma. The Transforming Trauma podcast is brought to you by the NARM Training Institute. NARM practitioner trainings for mental health professionals are offered across North America and internationally. Please join us starting in June for our online NARM training in learning how to transform trauma. This online NARM basics training is available for professionals working with clients or populations dealing with complex trauma. NARM provides a relational approach to addressing the current COVID pandemic and tools to support healing in the aftermath of this collective trauma. Join us for this Level 1 NARM training to become a NARM-informed professional. For more information and to apply, please visit at www.narmtraining.com/online-basics. Thanks to Andrea Klunder and the Creative Imposter Studios for producing and editing, to Tori Essex for our album art, and to Brad Kammer for the creation of this podcast. We really look forward to building community and connection with you and changing the world by transforming trauma.